Welcome to the Trend Detection Podcast powered by Siemens. And now, your host, Niall Sullivan.
So, welcome to this episode of the Trend Detection Podcast. I'm really excited to invite my colleague, Chris Garrison, all the way from the US. If you listen to the podcast, you won't be able to appreciate this, but if you're looking at the video, you'll be able to see a lovely background he's got there, which is nice. But we're not here to talk about Chris's background, well, in that sense, but we're actually going to talk about a favourite word of Senseye's, which is, or Senseye Predictive Maintenance, is actually scalability. You'll see it everywhere that's mentioning Senseye. Really, we talk about it a lot, and we talk about it a lot on this podcast and in other videos we do. We're going to dive into a little bit why we focus on that so much, actually. But before we get started, I'll just ask Chris to sort of just introduce yourself briefly to the audience.
Yeah, absolutely. Chris Garrison with Siemens Senseye. I've been with the organization now just about 6 months, but overall, pretty deep background in predictive maintenance and machine health and analytics. Really got started with vibration analysis as a core technology in 2004 and have continued to evolve from there, moving to AI type platforms in the last 4 or 5 years or so.
Fantastic. And actually, how long have you been at Senseye, Chris?
Just under 6 months now, so rather new starter.
Yeah. And how are you finding it? Just
terrific. Absolutely terrific.
Good to hear. And we've waited 6 months to give you a bit of time to bed in before inviting you on the podcast as well. But it's great to have you here. So the topic again, I said we want to focus on scalability, but it was actually a topic you mentioned. It's more about that resistance factor to scalability, which sure. I think if you speak to anyone within Senseye and Predictive Maintenance and the wider team, will be able to resonate with that. But why are we focusing on this topic today, I guess, is the first question.
Well, I think you get a lot of successful smaller scale pilots. What we're doing today is rather proven. But you have to bring visibility to these things, right? And you have to have sponsorship throughout an organization at the corporate level and absolutely at the site level. So I think you get a lot of programs that are success on a smaller scale. And you're often left to wonder, why hasn't this been adopted at an enterprise level? The value is there, and why haven't things really expanded and scaled forward?
And it's interesting, that word proven, because I think often, maybe still the case, maybe it's a good thing to explore, is often predictive maintenance projects are seen as sort of little science projects. We'll do a little bit of predictive maintenance and see it, rather than being a sort of, this is a proven tool and can do proven outcomes, like, obviously massive successes. So is that something that resonates with you, with your view?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that you've got your tried and true predictive maintenance technologies that have gained a lot of sponsorship and a lot of backing from maintenance managers, plant managers, reliability groups, of course. And now, we're on to the data science side of things, right? And maybe there are some unknowns. There are a lot of technologies popping up very quickly, a lot of promises out there, what works, what doesn't. And so in that regard, I could see some question, some resistance, but in the end, we are utilizing all of those proven technologies in a new way with big data, and really just doing things at scale.
And I guess one thing that prohibits, I'm just thinking about where the market, or what you're feeling about is where the market is at the moment. Is it a fact that it's still not at that stage where, even with proof points and case studies and success cases, there's not that trust or full trust in the software at this point to deliver?
Yeah, I think unfortunately over the years there have been a lot of fail to start type initiatives and organizations. I think maintenance budgets can often take a hit before other things. And, it's really unfortunate because the ROI is certainly there. The value is there. Everything that we talk about all the time, from increasing uptime, availability, production, changing the way maintenance organizations, really approach their maintenance, from PMs to inspections to on time type repairs. It's really transformative across the board.
No, I mean, absolutely. And it's interesting you mentioned, because you've mentioned two sort of, well, I mean, there's multiple stakeholders involved, of course, but you've mentioned sort of maintenance, and then you've mentioned enterprise, which is more of an IT, I guess more of an IT term, if we're going to talk about that. But how do those two sort of very contrasting groups sort of work together? How can they work together to sort of deliver these projects at scale, or successfully, I should say?
Yeah. I think IT and digital transformation groups have the initiatives. They have the will to experiment a bit and move forward, and the ability to do things really from a corporate perspective. But involvement from the plant level is still very much needed, right? You need those internal champions, those people that are going to help support those projects, so that the data is just really being put to use, and so that maintenance practices really are transforming. I think it's absolutely a partnership between IT and current maintenance organizations.
And just on that as well, that's at the core of it as well. But if we maybe could just take a step back and just sort of note some of those key factors that enable scalable predictive maintenance, what do organisations need to have in place as sort of a baseline to get started?
Well, I think you can get started at any time, right? You can get started with your most critical asset and reviewing your maintenance strategies, looking at the data that's available. But really, it's reviewing where you are in your data journey, right? What kind of instrumentation do you have around current assets? Have you done a criticality assessment to understand where you would get started? And where is that data today? Is it centralized? Is it going into a historian? Is it still at that PLC level where it might need to be retrieved and centralized? So there's a lot of questions to ask up front. And then you can do the value statement straight away, right? You can get to looking at very supported figures out there from a variety of groups, Ernst & Young and others, to look at the value statement, right? What is the expected return on investment, and things like that.
And actually, you mentioned return on investment. So, let's bring it back a little bit first. So, what I was thinking is, how can a vendor sort of support that activity? Because it sounds like a lot of activity, and I'm going to make a presumption that in a lot of cases, a customer might not know where to start. So I guess a vendor's quite key in terms of working together to achieve some of those points that you mentioned.
Yeah, and I think that's where Senseye really fits in great. We've got a lot of people with a lot of experience, from boots on the ground in facilities, working with machinery, the very practical aspect, and then of course, with IT organizations looking at security, helping answer all those questions. Bringing data into the cloud and processing. I think that's a journey and a partnership we're very well equipped to support. But I do think it takes kind of an internal group within an organization that agrees to structure and work together and kind of knock down any unforeseen barriers.
And I guess in reference to that, it's almost, and again, it's something we talk about a lot on the podcast, but it's almost that cultural change that needs to happen within the organisation as well. It's not, and again, something we mentioned a lot, but it's not just technology here. It's actually the culture and the ways of working that need to, you need to have an open mind and be willing to embrace that sort of change, throughout all the processes, workflows, etc.
You bring up a great point. At the plant level, there can often be a lot of resistance. I wouldn't say so much that anybody really believes today that these technologies are out to take their jobs, right? But to help streamline things and to help people stop firefighting, stop being so reactive, right? And so that involvement and that buy-in from plant personnel is still critical. They have to implement this. They have to take the results, act upon them, provide feedback. All that is very, very critical. And if you just have a corporate mandate to go and implement a technology, I have found at least that there can often be a lot of resistance to that at the plant level with maintenance people that are they have a job to do, necessarily want another tool that might. So I think getting in and working with maintenance folks and helping them realize that this is indeed a tool to make their life easier, to help them plan, to get ahead of workloads, all that good stuff, right? In the end, it very much benefits boots on the ground.
And actually, you meant right at the start of that, you mentioned about there's a resistance at plant level. Is there? And I think you sort of touched upon it there, but maybe we could go into that in a bit more detail. So, what's at the sort of the issue? What's at the heart of that resistance?
Well, I think you have current approaches and routines that people might be in, right? And so there might be some protection of that status quo, if you will. But I do think that there are a lot of things that can be pushed down from corporate levels to plant levels that can be viewed with a lot of resistance, right? If there's not a great understanding of the benefits. The great thing I think about Senseye, not to get too off topic here, but it really is kind of a self-service platform, right? Whether you are a maintenance technician that's been in the plant a year or two or three, or you are a senior plant manager, right? There are data tools, there's a platform available to help make your job easier, right? It's not just a black box or a magic curtain type application. There are tools for everyone at every level, and I think that is critical to engagement.
Yeah, so I see what you're saying. So it's a tool that can be used by multiple different stakeholders for different purposes. There may be some people who need to log in every day, maintenance staff, whatever, but there might be others who just need to log in once so often just to check the KPIs, or they want to just keep up to date with the high level KPIs, because we obviously have dashboarding and things like that, or reporting, I guess, to help with that. Yeah,
absolutely. To me, one of the primary benefits for everybody at every level that we just mentioned here is really centralization and optimization of data. You can have folks that take a lot of vibration rounds manually, or of course with wireless sensors more predominantly today. But is there time to go and do all of that analysis, to do all of that manual analysis, and still write work orders and follow up on root cause analysis and all the jobs that people have today in the predictive maintenance world? Applications like Senseye allow you to take all that data in and really watch it all, right, from a 10,000 foot level, and dig into the data by exception.
And that's exactly it. All data. And when we mentioned about plant level as well, is whether predictive maintenance or a tool could enable sort of collaboration as well. Because I guess if you're working in different plants, well, not that I'm from that environment at all, but it must be harder to share knowledge and things like that. But if you have one sort of unifying place to do that, then, and again, fitting into the cultural change aspect, and being able to collaborate and share knowledge must be a big bonus of that.
Absolutely. You brought up something that has always been very critical, and we could probably have a separate podcast altogether on this subject, but that's really knocking down data silos, right? You can have 4 or 5 plants that essentially make the same thing, same organization, with local PDM vendors, mom and pop type programs at one plant. In short, no standardization, right? Like implementation of a lot of technologies at different levels, with different levels of success, without one plant really knowing what the other plant does, right? And I do think there's a drive from the corporate level to change that, right? To standardize. And the benefits to standardization are amazing, right? I have been able to witness this firsthand. Silos, when when you give everybody access to all the data, when you take the best of what each facility is doing and bring visibility to that and implement it, I really think everybody wins.
And so what's the, I guess, stepping back from that, what's the consequence of not sharing that knowledge and keeping it, siloed at each sort of plant level?
Yeah, well, I think you can be doing very good work, right? You can have great successes, but there's not proper visibility, right? There's just no real recognition of some of the great work that people are doing. That's certainly, one side of the coin, I think. And the other might be, problems that have been solved elsewhere in the organization that you don't have visibility to, that you could very quickly implement. And so, yeah, it really is that knocking down that silo mentality has really multiple positive benefits.
Yeah, and I guess knocking down, it relates quite nicely to the next question, actually, about why PDM projects fail to scale. I guess that's what, when it depends what we talk about scale, actually. So maybe we could talk about that first. So what do we mean by scale? Is it a whole plant, a production line, a whole plant, or is it all of the above?
Yeah. So I think with today's initiatives on programs like what they call APM or asset performance management, or where we're actually looking, at all this data and bringing in tags from the historian, integrating predictive maintenance data, all that good stuff. I think there's a tendency today to say that's applicable to my most critical, most complex assets, where for me, joining Senseye, what was really most refreshing is the platform is very, very scalable in the sense that you shouldn't just take your most critical assets, your most complex assets, and think that that's really the only place where there's ROI, or that's where the effort, was warranted. We've had a lot of success on very, very simple rotating and static assets, right? Just about anything you can think of in a production environment, in a plant or industrial environment that has a couple of data indicators, right? It's amazing what we can do with little, and it's not just for those ultra complex, hypersensitive assets.
Yes, because of course they're already usually very well maintained. But I wonder why that's a common. The first thought sometimes from a customer's perspective is, obviously predictive maintenance. We want to predict our most important assets, because if they fail, it's just interesting, that mindset. How do you overcome that mindset of thinking beyond those and thinking about visibility of all assets, let's say?
Yeah, I think it is just changing that train of thought that, it's not cost prohibitive. And the ROI really is there to throw in simple things like robots and cylinders and heat exchangers and, really everything. Another part historically, really, for predictive maintenance, and we're talking about predictive maintenance, from a vibration analysis perspective or ultrasonic or what have you, is there's only been a certain class of assets really that are ideal for each of those technologies. Generally, steady state rotating assets, hypercritical, as we just covered, data and process indicators, along with machine health data tags and any predictive maintenance strategies you already may have deployed on an asset. Integrating that all into one large analysis platform just has enormous benefits.
I just wanted to touch on what you mentioned before. So you mentioned the term like APM, or asset performance management, as well. So maybe we could dive in. And again, it's slightly off topic, but I think it's interesting to discuss how, what are the differences between those? Because I guess some people in the industry use them interchangeably. Do they work together? Are they separate applications? What's your sort of view on that, Chris?
Yeah, I think that APM has become a very common term, and it can mean several different things. From one perspective, you've got simply asset health, right? The health and availability of an asset. And then you've got the word performance in there, right? So what could we do to tweak the parameters to help the application run more efficiently? Maybe not just get a little more uptime out of an asset, but improve production, right? And all of that data is there, right? To me, I think the goal is really one and the same. You can get into some, rather intensive process environments where you're looking at, changing a batch process. But we are looking at asset health, right? And we are taking in additional process indicators that can provide a lot of insight into actual performance within the line, within whatever that process may be.
Absolutely. And if we actually focus on the actual deployment or initial deployment for a second, so what are the challenges of deploying a predictive maintenance solution at scale?
Well, you've got to bring those groups together, as we touched on, right? You've got to have IT sponsorship along with the maintenance or reliability group initiative. Those have got to be joined together. I've seen a lot of singular type vested interest from a maintenance group who wants to get in and deploy these things, but they haven't yet formed that relationship with IT yet. They haven't really sold their initiative internally quite to the level that they need to. And so, they can't really answer the questions about how they can get data to the cloud, how they can centralize data, and are they in line with security requirements? Just a host of things, really.
And I guess a big consequence of not bringing in a key stakeholder early on is, or bringing them in later in the project, is that they've not had the chance to see the platform, understand. But I mean, we could talk about any sort of software sale here, but they don't understand the platform, don't understand what it does, and I guess it's that feeling of being left out, isn't it? No, I mean, no one wants just to be, whether a user being told this is the platform you're using, or IT being told this is the platform we want to use, and everyone just wants to know from the outset and be involved from the outset as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that for those of us within delivery here with Senseye, we're well versed in understanding that, right? And we can help translate some of those things and provide information that an IT department might look for, right? If somebody in maintenance is not well versed on such things, we can help significantly in those areas. But I've always thought it's a great idea to engage IT early and often, and have supporting stakeholders in each area.
When you say supporting stakeholders, because again we use the term champions, and there's usually maybe one champion, or there could be. I mean, ideally, I guess you'd like multiple champions. But it's an interesting concept. You're saying, is it almost a champion in each of those areas that you want? Ideally, maybe that's not always possible or feasible, but is that what you're sort of moving towards?
I do think a site champion or an enterprise champion is critical, right? Somebody that is crossing all the lines and looking through each individual portion of the deployment. But then, yes, within IT, within security, within these groups, we do need individual supporters. But you touched on a great point. To have a champion, to have somebody that is passionate about it, that's driving it as kind of a project management role from the organization, that has just great effects.
Again, that's interesting. That again, it's obviously lots of stakeholders involved, but it's almost like you need champions within the plant or their particular area of the business, but you also need champions who go across, horizontally. So I guess we're talking vertically and horizontal champions. Is a term I've not used before, but
no, I think that's fairly accurate. I really do. I've seen a lot of IT-driven initiatives where there's not a lot of involvement from people that actually turn wrenches on this equipment, that understand the efforts that go into really how machines fail or what it takes to repair them. and the type of information that's actually actionable, right? What type of information does a maintenance manager really want to consume to be able to take action, to understand what the data means, what should be done about it, how urgent it is, so on and so forth. You really need that partnership so that they can help align everything along the way, so that IT is clear on what's needed, so we don't send too little data too infrequently. There may be a requirement to add sensors. That's another subject altogether. People often think they have to add tons of instrumentation, and we're often very pleasantly surprised by how little instrumentation needs to be added to existing equipment to gain some valuable insight.
Because why is there that assumption that we must add sensors or more hardware to do that? Is there a reason, do you think, for that assumption?
I think that some of the approaches from earlier projects certainly could have helped form that narrative. Often in the very beginning of some of these projects, a lot that I was exposed to really as well in the last 10 years, you're looking at FMEA templates, failure mode effect analysis. You're looking at how machines can fail, and you're looking at classic instrumentation that you might need to detect those failures. And although we're very much rooted in the core predictive maintenance technologies and bringing those into the platform, we're combining so many different data points that we don't necessarily need all of those sensors, all that instrumentation. Often the data is there on a PLC somewhere, and it hasn't been accessible to the maintenance department, right? It's been going off into some historian or process engineers have had that information, but maintenance departments and maintenance personnel, reliability personnel, have not been using that data as a machine health metric, right? They've been maybe instrumenting the equipment with some aftermarket sensors. So long story short, in my long spiel there, I think historically people have felt that they need all these sensors, all this instrumentation, and with some review and discussion and some case history review, I think we could have some positive discussions to show that's not always the case, and it's usually not the case.
It's interesting as well, because when I go to events, a lot of the time there's a feeling I get that there's a lot of data collecting in lots of different places. Again, going back to silos and that kind of thing, but then customers or organizations just don't know what to do with it. It's like Industry 4.0 taught them to collect you need all this data, you need to start using sensors and everything to collect data, but then it's like, well, now what kind of now I have the data, what do I do next with it?
Yeah, absolutely. And who has time to pick through these individual indicators and look for some of this data that might provide health insights, right? So bringing that in under a trained algorithm that establishes normal, right, and brings anomalies to your attention when you need it, negates the false positives and really streamlines the data that you care about from a machine health perspective. I just think that's very transformative, especially today with labor shortages and other challenges. It enables maintenance groups to do more with less.
Yeah, and I guess, again, it's interesting what you said about labor shortages as well. So how can sort of scalable predictive maintenance sort of help to overcome those challenges, which we know a lot of organizations are facing?
Yeah, it's like putting a couple of extra bodies, in a seat reviewing data 24/7. It really is that simple. In the last couple of years, especially post-COVID, I have visited and worked with a lot of organizations that are taking great data, exactly as you mentioned, but they don't have time to review. their most critical assets, in some way they're compromising. They're not getting a chance to review it all. From a manual analysis perspective, the more data you bring in, the more human time it takes. And that's where a platform like this just simply um, looks for the outliers, does the scanning and the analysis for you, and really still allows you to make the determination on how you should act on a piece of equipment, right? It's not taking any power away from anyone in maintenance from my perspective. It's very much empowering them to see more than they ever could have manually on their own, and giving them more data points to make important decisions.
I mean, and that's interesting because, I mean, I think we're coming possibly towards the end, but it's been really interesting. It's sort of flown by, actually. This conversation is amazing. But you mentioned a little bit before about building a business case, and obviously what you've just described then should form at least part of it, doing more with less, as it were. But what other sort of key factors are there in terms of building a business case for this kind of sort of scalable predictive maintenance?
Yeah, there are a lot of calculators and things that we can use depending on the desire to structure that business case in a certain format. But you're looking at saved labor hours, right? You're looking at increased uptime, machine performance. You're looking at a huge reduction in maintenance costs, right? Fixing machinery at a stage where you can still be preventative and proactive rather than reactive. I think many people have touched on this, and it's nothing new, but if you have advanced notification that a machine is failing, you can, go in and be preventative still and proactive, right? You can save a part from needing complete replacement, maybe save an entire motor from having to be replaced. And so you can dig really deep in these ROI discussions because there's a lot of value at a lot of different levels. But you can really start with looking at what an hour of downtime looks like, really, and going from there.
And I guess some of those benefits, let's say, or outcomes, as you mentioned, they must differ across industries in terms of, let's say, importance, for want of a better phrase.
Sure. And you could compare maybe some food and bev environments to, hypersensitive batch processing in a chemical organization, right? And you could see tremendous differences in ROI on machine availability. But we've done a lot of work in like food and bev and other industries where, the ROI is still very much there, right? Reducing inventory, being able to schedule manpower for repairs, being able to have very, very effective shutdowns and overhaul periods. The value is really there in every industrial environment.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess in the food and beverage side, it's also sort of wastage as well, or spoilage kind of things come into it as well, which might not be the case in other industries.
Absolutely. There are still a lot of organizations that say we run to failure. It's what we've always done. We don't feel like there's any penalty to that, but we would love to dig into that with you a little bit and help you understand that there are still a lot of savings and efficiencies to be had.
Actually, it's funny you mentioned that phrase because I did an interview last week with someone again in our sort of space, but they actually said that's a good, it's a fine strategy, run to failure if if you're fully on board with it and the repercussions of that. I just thought it was an interesting point. So if you know the consequence of that, then that's absolutely fine. But
yeah, absolutely. There's always a cost between knowing and not knowing. Absolutely, always a cost.
Yeah, but it's actually what you're saying is that's fine to do that, but there's actually stuff you can do to make efficiencies and be more productive and things like that as well. So it's just sort of pointing those out as well.
Absolutely. I think one layer that's underexplored maybe is optimization of PMs. optimization of preventative type maintenance rounds, operator rounds, inspections. Maybe it's just remote equipment that's rather difficult or has some safety hazards associated with accessing it. There's just a ton of reasons why you might want to bring an asset in to have this kind of visibility.
Absolutely. So as we come towards the end, I'd just like to I guess maybe summing up what some of the stuff we've discussed, but in terms of a company looking to be more, move ahead of single asset deployments and small pilots and wants to do something more scalable sooner, let's say, and not like what would your advice be, Chris, to sort of get started on that journey?
I think it always starts with an asset list, and then we sit down and review what data is available, right? And that's where I think people are pleasantly surprised that we can move forward with very little. We can help centralize data and bring it into a centralized location. We can even bring in data manually, for some time for insights. Not that that's ideal, but we can get started with very little and build from there. Great.
Really good advice. So yeah, I think it's been really useful session. I hope everyone out there who's listened has enjoyed it too. I'd like to thank Chris. Thank you again for taking part. It's been really great to have you on. We'll certainly have you on again soon if you're happy to. That'd be really good to continue some of these themes. Like I say, go into some of these little pockets we went to, but maybe not enough detail for this particular podcast, but there'll hopefully be opportunities to do that again in the future.
Yeah, I think that's done quite a bit. Plenty more to talk about. Absolutely. Look forward to it.
Fantastic. So yes, that's all that's left to say is thank you everyone for listening. And thank you again to Chris for joining us today, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Please like and subscribe on all major podcast channels and find out more about Senseye Predictive Maintenance at Siemens.com.